Okay, so now let's go ahead. Let's create a backdoor. And the only difference is we're going to set the IP to the public IP instead of the local IP. So we're going to create a backdoor exactly the same way that we used to create it when we're hacking devices in the same network. So I'm going to use will evasion. And I'm going to do this a bit quickly because we've done it and there's nothing new with this. So we can list to see what we have. I'm going to use number 9, so it's the exact same payload that we used in our previous video. It's the reverse HTTP payload. So we're going to use 9. And we can see the options here. We can see that the L port is set to 8080 by default, and I'm going to keep that the same. The only thing that I'm going to change is the L host. And in the previous videos, when we were receiving connections on our own computer, we used to set it to the local IP. So if I do ifconfig lan 0, we used to set it to 192.168.0.1 because that's the IP that the devices use inside the network. But whenever we want to do things on the outside, we want to use the real IP because these internal IPs are not visible to computers outside the network. So I'm going to use the IP that I see on Google. So when I type in what's my IP, I get this IP. And I'm going to use that as the L host in my backdoor. So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to set it here. And sorry, I didn't paste it properly. So hit info to make sure everything is set up properly. So port 8080, we're using the public IP. So this is the most important step in this. And then we're going to do generate. And we're just going to call this backdoor.exe. I'm going to hit enter. And that has generated my payload for me. So it's stored in here. So again, as usual, I'm actually going to copy this and paste it in my var www.html. And I'll show you how to actually even download this from the internet from outside the network. So I'm just going to copy this to my web server directory. Okay, so that's all done. Now, all we have to do is just listen for incoming connections. We're going to do that using the multi-handler. So we've done that before again. I'm just going to do it real quick. And when I'm going to listen to the multi-handler, I'm actually going to listen on my local IP. So I'm not going to listen on the external. I'm going to listen on the local because I can't listen on the external. I'm actually in the network and I only have control over my current computer. So what I'm going to do now is in here, in the Kali machine, I'm going to listen on port 8080. And in the external device, the backdoor will try to connect to the backdoor. So the step after that will set up IP forwarding to tell the router to forward ports 8080 to the Kali machine. But first we need to listen on port 8080 in the Kali machine. And we're going to do that using the multi-handler. So I'm just going to do MSF console. Again, we did this before, so I'm going to do it a little bit quickly. So I'm going to use exploit multi-handler. I'm going to set the payload to Windows Meterpreter reverse HTTP. Then we're going to set the L port to 8080. So that's the port that we're going to get connections on. And then I'm going to set the L host, the listening host, to my private IP, as I said before. So I'm going to do set L host to 192.168.0.11. Now I'm going to do show options to make sure everything is done properly. And we can see that we have the L port is set to 8080 and the local host is set to 192.168.0.11. And we're using a payload of Windows Meterpreter reverse HTTP. So it's all good. I'm going to do exploit. As you can see here, it's listening on my private IP and it's listening on port 8080. So now we did the two main steps. We created a backdoor and the backdoor will give us connections back based on the real IP address. And we're listening on our local machine, we're listening on port 8080 in the Kali machine. So when the target person runs the backdoor on the internet, they're gonna get, the backdoor will try to connect to this IP on port 8080. The only problem now is the gateway, which is the router right here, it doesn't have port 8080 open. So it's going to receive the connection. It's not going to know what to do with it. So we actually need to configure the router to tell it whenever you get something, whenever you get a connection on port 8080, I want you to redirect it to my Kali machine. And we can do that in two ways, and we're going to talk about them in the next lecture.